Medic! We need a medic here!
Look carefully at the man on the right. One side of his face is wrapped in a bandage. Mud covers his uniform. He has only one uncovered eye. And the man leaning against him is badly wounded. At first glance, the photograph seems simple enough. One injured American soldier trying to help another. But there is something about this picture that completely changes once you know who the man with the bandaged face actually was. He wasn't waiting for the medic. He was the medic. His name was Thomas Cole. He was 20 years old. And when Associated Press photographer Henri Huet captured this image on January 30th, 1966, Cole had already suffered a head wound of his own. Yet while a firefight continued around him, he was still treating other men. The soldier in his arms was Staff Sergeant Harrison Pell, and this photograph would soon be seen by millions of Americans. But what happened outside the frame was even more remarkable, because Cole did not treat one man and stop. He kept going. The photograph was taken near Enthiz during one of the first major American offensives of 1966. The operation was called Masher. The 1st Cavalry Division was moving through the Bong Son area of South Vietnam, trying to find and destroy communist forces that had established themselves throughout the region. The plan relied heavily on what made the 1st Cavalry different: helicopters. Units could be inserted rapidly, moved across difficult terrain, reinforced and supplied from the air. On paper, mobility was one of the Americans' greatest advantages. Then, the weather changed. Rain and low clouds interfered with helicopter movement and restricted air support just as enemy resistance was becoming stronger. The Army's own after-action report described the situation plainly. The deeper the cavalry moved into the area, the harder the resistance became. By January 29 and 30, elements of the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry were fighting through positions defended by enemy forces around them, and that unit name matters: 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry. Only a little more than 2 months earlier, the same battalion had walked into the devastating ambush at Landing Zone Albany during the Ia Drang campaign. 155 men from Tussola's 7th Cavalry were killed there. Now, in January 1966, the battalion was back in combat, and somewhere inside that fight was a 20-year-old medic from Richmond, Virginia. Thomas Cole, a rifleman, could sometimes stay behind cover when fire swept across open ground. A medic did not always have that choice. The entire purpose of putting medical aidmen with combat units was speed. When a soldier went down, treatment had to begin before that man could reach a field hospital, before he could reach a helicopter, sometimes before he could even be moved. That meant the medic had to be close to the infantry. And when someone was hit, the safest position on the battlefield could suddenly become irrelevant, because somewhere else someone would call for him. Medic, doc, corpsman. Different units used different names. The meaning was the same. Someone was hurt. Come now. Army medical histories from Vietnam describe aidmen serving directly with combat elements, and shortages sometimes kept medical personnel at the front far longer than originally planned. Their job was not to wait until the firing ended. Their job existed precisely because the firing had not ended, and on January 30th, Thomas Cole became one of the wounded himself. The injury was serious enough that the left side of his head had to be bandaged. One eye was covered. For most soldiers, that would have meant becoming a patient. Cole continued acting like the medic. War correspondent Bob Poos was there. So was Henri Huet. What they witnessed was not one dramatic act performed for a camera. Cole kept responding as casualties appeared. A wounded man here, another somewhere else. Each one created the same problem. Cole could remain where he was and protect himself. Or he could move toward the man calling for help. Again and again, he chose the second option. At one point, Cole reached a soldier whose condition was desperate. He tried mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and he did not stop after a few seconds. According to Poos's account, Cole continued trying to revive that man for roughly an hour. An hour. Think about what that means inside a battle. Every minute spent with one casualty meant another man could be calling somewhere else. Every movement exposed Cole again. Every treatment used energy and supplies while he was already injured himself. And after all that effort, the soldier he was trying to save died. There was no cinematic payoff, no sudden breath, no miraculous recovery. Cole had spent approximately an hour trying to keep one man alive, and failed. Then, there were still other wounded men. So he continued. Somewhere in that same chaos, Henri Huet raised his camera. Huet was not standing safely behind the battle, photographing it with a long lens. He was moving with the troops. His photographs from Antibes show men crawling through mud, troops crouching under fire, exhausted soldiers packed into captured positions, and wounded Americans being treated almost where they had fallen. Then he found Thomas Cole. There are moments when a photograph becomes powerful because the photographer captures the instant of action. A weapon firing, an explosion, a helicopter falling. This photograph works differently. Almost nothing in it needs to move. Cole looks upward through his one uncovered eye. His bandage immediately tells us something has already happened to him. Harrison Pell rests against him. Cole's hands tell us what is happening next. The entire story seems to exist inside one contradiction. The man who clearly needs medical attention is the one providing it. Huet pressed the shutter, and he created one of the defining photographs of his career. When the images reached the Associated Press Bureau, the famous life photographer Larry Burroughs saw the photograph. He immediately recognized its power. Days later, America would see it too. On February 11, 1966, the photograph appeared on the cover of Life magazine. The war in Vietnam was increasingly entering American homes, not as lines on a military map, but as individual human faces. And now one of those faces belonged to Thomas Cole. The cover identified the strange truth visible in the photograph. Cole himself had been wounded, yet he was caring for another wounded American. Millions of people could look at that photograph, but they could not hear what had happened around it. They could not hear the wounded calling. They could not see Cole moving from one casualty to the next. They could not watch an hour-long attempt to revive a man end in failure. A camera can capture 1/500th of a second. Everything on either side of that fraction disappears. And that is why this photograph becomes more powerful, not less, once you know the rest of the story. Because this was not the moment Thomas Cole suddenly decided to be brave. It was simply the moment a photographer happened to be watching. Before Vietnam, Cole had been interested in medicine. He had considered becoming a physical therapist. Then he joined the army and became a medic. Nothing about that biography predicts what a 20-year-old will do after somebody opens fire on him. Training can teach a man how to stop bleeding, how to protect an airway, how to stabilize an injury. It cannot guarantee that he will crawl toward the person who needs those skills while people are shooting at him. Cole did. His wound at Antibes eventually took him away from the battlefield. On February 19, less than 3 weeks after the photograph was taken, Henri Huet photographed Cole again. This time, there was no mud, no casualty in his arms, no firefight. Cole was at the 3rd Field Hospital in Saigon, recovering from his head wound and writing a letter home. For a moment, the story could have ended there. A famous photograph, a wounded medic, a young man fortunate enough to survive. But Cole recovered, and then he went back to his unit. 6 months passed. Cole was approaching the end of his time in Vietnam. According to the later account of his service, he was only about 2 weeks away from returning to the United States. 2 weeks. After everything he had already survived, the calendar was finally running out. Then another fight began. Another American soldier went down, and Thomas Cole did what he had done before. He moved toward him. This time, he would not make it across untouched. Gunfire struck Cole. One round shattered his left arm. Another hit his left thigh. The medic who had become famous across America for treating wounded men while wounded himself was now seriously wounded again. And once again, it happened while he was trying to reach someone else. That is the part of the story the photograph cannot tell you. The behavior caught in that famous frame was not unique to January 30. Months later, with home almost within reach, Cole again moved toward a casualty. And this time the price was much higher. Cole survived. He eventually returned home to Richmond, Virginia. There is a temptation with stories like this to turn the ending into something clean. A medal, a ceremony, a famous speech, a neat final chapter. Thomas Cole's story does not give us that. In later years, even some men who had reportedly been treated by him tried unsuccessfully to locate him. Bob Poos, the correspondent who had watched Cole work that day in 1966, never forgot him. Years later, Poos remembered the young medic in remarkably simple terms. He had been saving lives. He had been sharp and, as Poos put it, a real good kid. Perhaps that description says more than a page of decorations ever could, because Cole was 20, not a senior surgeon, not a legendary officer, not someone who arrived in Vietnam expecting his face to appear on the cover of Life. He was a young Army medic doing a job that forced him to make the same decision every time a man cried out, "Stay here," or "Go to him." Cole's story was extraordinary, but the terrible logic behind it was familiar to American combat medics throughout Vietnam. A wounded infantryman did not care about medical organization charts. He cared about one question: how quickly could Doc reach him? Army records of combat medics are filled with the same pattern: aidmen leaving cover, crossing exposed ground, treating men while under fire, continuing after being wounded themselves. Some survived, some did not. During the Vietnam War, 20 of the 2059 Medals of Honor awarded for actions in the conflict went to medics, corpsmen, or other medical personnel. Roughly 1 out of every 13. That number does not mean medics were braver than everyone around them. It tells us something about the nature of the job. The infantryman's instinct under fire is to find protection and return fire. The medic's job can require him to move toward the place where somebody has already been hit. That is the contradiction visible in Thomas Cole's photograph. The danger has already identified one location, and the medic has to go there anyway. Now go back to January 30, 1966. Forget for a moment that this became a famous photograph. Forget the magazine cover. Forget the photographer. Just look at the two men. Staff Sergeant Harrison Pell is wounded. Thomas Cole is holding him. Cole's own head is bandaged. Only one eye is uncovered. Outside the frame, other Americans are fighting. Some are wounded. One man will receive nearly an hour of Cole's effort and still die. None of those things are visible. And that is precisely why the photograph matters. It does not show the whole story. It proves the story happened. The camera caught Cole for a fraction of a second in the middle of doing something he had already been doing and would continue doing after the shutter closed. There was no reason for him to look heroic. There was no time to pose. There was simply another wounded man. Henri Huet would continue photographing the Vietnam War for years. In 1971, he was killed when the helicopter carrying him and several other photographers were shot down over loss. But among the thousands of images left behind, the photograph of Thomas Cole still stands apart, not because it shows the largest battle, not because it contains the most destruction. It is powerful because you understand it almost instantly. One man is wounded. Another man is helping him. Then you notice the bandage, and the entire picture changes. The helper is wounded too. Then you learn one more thing. He's the medic, and the picture changes again. Then you discover what happened outside the photograph. That Cole kept answering calls. That he spent an hour trying to revive a man he could not save. That he recovered. That he returned to duty. That 6 months later, with only weeks left before home, he was shot again while going to another casualty. And suddenly the photograph is no longer just an image of one remarkable moment. It becomes evidence of who Thomas Cole was when somebody needed him. Most famous war photographs show us what happened. This one asks us to notice who was doing it. The bandaged 20-year-old was not being rescued. He was not waiting for somebody to carry him away. He was the man the others were waiting for. Thomas Cole could not save every soldier he reached that day. No medic could. But while he was physically capable of answering another call, he kept answering it. And 50 years later, one photograph still preserves the moment when Henri Huet looked to his camera and saw something extraordinary happening in an ordinary combat medic's job. A wounded man taking care of the wounded. Because when someone cried for a medic, Thomas Cole was still the medic.